Okay, let's talk about VTP. VTP is actually a protocol that is not included in the CISCO ENCOR syllabus. However, there are other protocols such as VTP and multiple spanning tree that are related to VTP that are actually included in the syllabus. So that is why I am including VTP in these sessions. So let's talk a little bit about the theory, and then we will jump into the lab. VTP stands for VLAN Trunking Protocol. It is a CISCO proprietary protocol. It basically does two things. The first thing it does is distributing and synchronizing the VLAN database, and secondly, it does something that is known as VLAN pruning. So why do we need this? Actually, VTP tries to solve two problems. First, reducing the administrative burden of having to create and maintain a VLAN database. So for instance, if you had to create 100 VLANs in 5 switches, VTP will save you a lot of time because you will have to create these VLANs only once, and VTP will be in charge of distributing this VLAN database across all your switches and synchronize these VLANs at every change you do. So you will have to do it only once. And then with pruning, VTP helps reducing the amount of broadcast, unicast, or non-unicast, and multicast on your network. Let's first talk about the how VTP distributes and synchronizes VLAN databases. First of all, VTP works with a file that is known as the VLAN.dat file. It is in your switch, and it is where your VTP VLAN database lives. Your VLAN database has something that is known as the revision number. Every time you change your VLAN database, every time you add a VLAN, change the name of a VLAN, or delete a VLAN, this revision number increases by 1 in such a way that the device that happens to have the highest revision number will have to distribute its VLAN database or synchronize its VLAN database with all the other devices that have a lower revision number. This distribution and synchronization happens through VTP advertisements. VTP advertisements are carried by ISL. So you will need a trunk in order to carry these VTP advertisements. So trunks are needed in order for VTP to work, and you will need to have or define some switches as VTP servers, some switches as VTP clients in order for all of this to work. Your server and clients should have the same domain name and passwords for security measures. Now, in this summary, I have listed what are the types of switches that will operate in a network where VTP is running. You will have VTP servers, VTP clients, VTP switches operating in transparent or off mode. Your switches that operate in server and client mode actually are distributing their VLAN database and synchronizing their VLAN database with one another. Transparent and off mode switches have their local database. Transparent off and server switches are able to create, change, and delete VLANs. Client mode switches cannot modify the VLAN database, and most of them can forward VTP messages, with the exception of switches operating in off mode. Now, these are the actual VTP frames known as VTP advertisements. You will need to memorize these what VTP advertisements exist and what they're needed for. You have summary advertisements that are actually letting everybody know that what is the current revision number in the network. You have subset advertisements that are used to send the actual updates of the current VLAN database, and request advertisements that are created by switches that are asking the network to get the database updated. Now these are the configuration commands that you will need. First, in this order, you have to configure the domain name, the VTP version, your VTP password, and the switch mode. By default, a switch operates in server mode. It has a domain name set to null and the revision number set to 0. VTP version 1 and 2 work synchronizing only the normal VLAN range, whereas VTP version 3 synchronizes the extended VLAN range, private VLANs, and multiple spanning tree configuration. VTP version 3 introduces several new features. For instance, the VTP primary, that is a single device that can modify the VLAN database. Commands for distributing the multiple spanning tree configuration, for instance, VTP mode server MST or VTP mode client MST. The capability of setting a switch in off mode so it will not forward VTP messages globally or per interface, and ways to store the VTP password in a more secure manner. And we have pruning. With pruning, the objective of pruning is reducing the amount of broadcast, unknown unicast, and multicast between switches. In order to do so, VTP will notice when you are not using a VLAN in a certain switch. So for instance, in this example, switch V is actually not using VLAN 10. It doesn't have any device that belongs to VLAN 10 connected to switch V. So the broadcast unknown unicast and multicast that get sent to switch V are a waste of bandwidth. VTP notices that and then prunes a certain VLAN from a port. In this case, VTP notices that switch V is not actually using VLAN 10, so it will prune VLAN 10 from this port. So the multicast, broadcast, and unknown unicast aimed at VLAN 10 are not sent through this port because VLAN 10 is pruned from that port. So how do you configure pruning? You configure this command. For version 1 and 2, you only have to execute it at one server, and for VTP version 3 you will have to execute this at every single switch. Now you can define what VLANs are permitted to be pruned. This is known as the pruning eligible list. Or you can define what VLANs are not eligible for pruning. That is known as the pruning ineligible VLANs. These are the commands. For instance, for the pruning ineligible VLANs, use this command. Remember to add number 1 and this range because that is always ineligible. And then let's go to the troubleshooting part of this session. First of all, if you notice that VTP is not working, first you have to check that you have trunks. Remember that trunk interfaces carry VTP advertisements, so you need trunks in order for VTP to work. Next, if you notice that your VLAN database is not getting synchronized, check your password. You can also check other things with show VTP status, that you have the same VTP version, that you have the same domain name, and you are running the correct switch mode. Now, if you are using VTP to distribute multiple spanning tree configuration, you can use show VTP status to see if you are running a device in server mode for MST and that you have a primary server mode. Use this command for having in order to have a primary server for MST, and make sure that you have servers, MST servers and MST clients. Now, how do you troubleshoot pruning? Make sure that pruning is enabled with show VTP status. Next, calculate whether pruning is working, so you can compare with this command the VLANs allowed and active in the management domain versus the VLANs in the spanning tree forwarding state and not pruned. So in this case, you can notice that VLAN 10 is being pruned. You can also validate your prune eligible disk with show interface switch port. And finally, this is the summary of features. These are the version 1 features, version 2 features, and version 3 features. You might as well memorize them. Now, let's jump into the lab. Now, we're going to configure switch 3 and switch 4, which are my distribution switches, as VTP servers. And access A will be a VTP client. We are going to configure pruning as well. So let's see what are my defaults. So for instance, show VTP status. By default, it is operating in server mode, null, domain name, and version 3 in this case. So let's configure this. Notice that I don't have a VLAN. Our VLANs that we're going to work with are VLAN 10, VLAN 100, 101, and 102. So let's configure this as server. The first command is VTP domain, let's say lab. Then remember that we have dynamic trunks between my distribution layer and my access layer. VTP version 3, VTP password foo. Notice that DTP is heavily related to VTP. In this case, DTP is detecting a domain mismatch between the distribution layer and the access layer, because I have set here my domain name to lab, whereas in this access switch the domain name is null. The trunks are still up, they don't go down, but I can see the warning that the domains are mismatching. So let's enable pruning, and let's do that at switch 4 as well. The initial status is server mode, domain name is null, version is 3. Okay, now, so let's VTP domain lab VTP version 3 VTP password full and VTP pruning. Now let's go to access A and notice that I am receiving now the warnings for the DTP trunks that I have towards switch 4. So let's do a test here. I'm going to reset my trunk ports. I'm just going to reset them. Remember that these are DTP ports, or dynamic trunks. So after resetting them, given there is a domain mismatch, they are not coming up. So that is the relation between VTP and DTP. So I'm going to set up the domain here, the domain name here. So now the VTP domains match, and then my trunks have to come up. I have gigabit 00 and 01. I need gigabit 02 and 03 for switch 4. Okay. VTP version 3. And VTP pruning. So if you wanted to see where VTP is storing its database, we could issue, for instance, dir nvram. Here's the vlan.dat. Here's where VTP is storing the actual database. So we can start creating the database here. For instance, if I wanted to create a VLAN 10, I cannot because I don't have a primary server. This is a version 3 thing. So I have to execute VTP primary, the VTP primary command. I need a primary server in order to modify the VLAN database. So this takes a little bit. Okay, yes, confirm. So if I issue show VTP status, I am the primary server, and this is the primary ID. Show VTP status. This is just a server, and this one show VTP status. This is a server as well. We need to configure this one as client. VTP mod client. Okay, now I'm going to create the VLANs. VLAN 10, name management, VLAN 100, name users, VLAN 101, name VoIP, VLAN 102, name guest. Okay, if I show VLAN here, VLAN 10, 100, 101, 102 must exist. Okay, I have this VLANs now. Let's see switch 4 and issue the same command. I should have VLAN 10, 100, and 101. Let's issue that here. I must have VLAN 10. I don't have them. Yeah, something is not working. If you were paying attention, Remember that we didn't set up a password, so this is a common error. VTP password. Most of the time the password is missing. So after setting the correct password, we have the VLANs now. And remember that we are pruning. So if I issue here show interface trunk, I can see that gigabit 2.0 and 2.1 are the trunks that go from distribution to access. We are allowing these VLANs here. They exist. And at gigabit 2.0 and 2.1, they are not being sent here, probably because spanning tree. Let's check out here my allowed VLAN list. 2.0 and 2.1, 2.0 and 2.1, 2.0 and 2.1. Let's see. Oh, in this case, this is the root. So let's set up switch 3 as the root. Oh, I cannot do that. Okay. Now this is the root now. And let's set up these as... I am just doing this to make a point with pruning. So let's see now my trunk interfaces. Gigabit 2.0 and 2.1. This is the allowed VLAN list. Allowed VLAN list. And none. Let's see here. They are getting filtered here for some reason. Only gigabit 0.0 is forwarding this, but this is happening because of a spanning tree. Now let's see if pruning is enabled. Pruning enabled. Pruning enabled. Pruning enabled. Show spanning tree, VLAN 10. Designated. It seems to be working correctly, but pruning is somehow not working. Show spanning tree, VLAN 10. Designated. So show show spanning tree VLAN 10. Two 0 and 2 1 are not listed here for some. Or this one. Sorry, this is the root. Okay. Show interface trunk. Okay, it took a while, but we can see here that after this filter, VLAN 100, 101, and 102 are allowed. VLAN 10 is missing, and VLAN 10 is missing because of pruning. In this case, in the access switch, we are not using any port for VLAN 10. We have assigned a port for VLAN 100, a port for VLAN 101, and a port for VLAN 102. That is why these VLANs are not pruned. VLAN 10 is getting pruned. What if I don't want that? So I will go and configure, for instance, at my gigabit to 2021 switch port trunk pruning VLAN except 110. I have to set up my list of pruning ineligible VLANs. So after doing that, I am saying that 10 should not be pruned. So now it appears. Previous to entering this command, VLAN 10 was being pruned. With this command, I am instructing the switch to never prune VLAN 10. And now it appears here and here. Let's see if we can do that in Nexus. Okay, I think I will have to do a feature VTP. For Nexus, you have to enable features before using the command. So first feature VTP, then VTP domain lab, VTP version. I only have up to version 2 in Nexus. Password foo and VTP pruning. Oh, I don't have pruning here. Well, Nexus is a little bit different. Feature VTP, VTP domain lab, VTP version 2, and VTP password foo. Okay, and I now can create show VTP status version 2. Oh, transparent mode. Okay. VTP mode server. Oh, guess what? I cannot use server mode here. Only transparent mode. Okay, bad luck. So we have to create the VLANs here. Manually. That is the disadvantage of not having VTP. So we'll have to create it manually. Okay, that's it.